Good afternoon. Welcome to the NATO Strategic Direction South Southern Talks. Welcome to another edition of that. My name's Duncan Ayres. Today, we're really fortunate to have with us Dr. Omar Ashur. Hello, Omar.
Hello. Pleasure to be here.
Good. Thank you for being with us. I'll quickly do a very quick bio because otherwise we'd be here all day talking about your achievements. But just to let our audience know, Dr. Ashur has previously been at the Institute of Arabic and Islamic Studies at Exeter University. He's also an associate fellow at Chatham House, currently professor of security studies at the Doha Institute, and he's even been a senior consultant for the UN. You will, if you ever watch CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, you'll no doubt see his face providing expert analysis and expertise, and also in print, foreign policy, The Guardian, Washington Post, to name but a few. He has a number of books, one of which I think, or two of which you can see behind him, but in particular, How ISIS Fights. And that's really going to be some of the subject of our discussion, of our Southern Talk today. And as you can see, everything I've just told you, what does that tell us? It tells us he's an expert on the area, on the region, and that's why we're very lucky to have him with us today. Dr. Ashur, if I can just start, why don't you just tell us before we go into the talk, what first started your interest in this, not only this region, but also this subject, hybrid warfare, terrorism, etc., etc. If you just take us through what first really caught your eye on that subject.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation and the very kind introduction. Just a small update. I left Chatham House a long time ago, so now I'm with the Security and Strategy Institute in the University of Exeter. I'm an honorary professor there, and still, of course, with the Doha Institute. And I have a Ukrainian affiliation as a non-resident senior fellow in the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation. So this is the latest update. It changes quite a bit. Back to the question. So my main interest was really on that particular subject, the combat effectiveness of non-state forces or of the smaller side. It was in a completely different world in the world of 2011, 2012, when there was the Arab Spring was still going on, and I think I was going, and a colleague who worked as well in the UN in the CTITF Counter-Terrorism Implementation Task Force, he sent me a video, and that video was basically a tactic. A very small group tried to take a position, a headquarters, a command post in Aleppo, and the tactic was very unique because they managed to destroy that command post and take over that area temporarily before they withdrew in about 7 minutes. That group later on became known as Jabhat al-Nusra, the Nusra Front. And then after changing multiple times in terms of behavior, ideology, breaking ties with Al-Qaeda and so on, became HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and now they're ruling Syria, or they're the main force that is ruling Syria. But back then, that tactic was, it was a very interesting tactic. It's they were trying to take a command post that had multiple belts, security belts, and with very small, not very small, like a Toyota-sized civilian cars. They were laden with explosives. They took the three first security belts with these cars. So VIBIDs, basically, or SVIBIDs, suicide vehicle-borne IEDs. And then the big truck destroyed the building after that. A 5-ton truck moved because these small cars created holes in the security belts, and the truck moved and hit the building. The building fell. And after that, a small platoon-sized unit just did the mopping, or the mop-up.
Yeah.
And the Free Syrian Army back then was trying to do something similar for 3 weeks and failing. And they did this. They had to add the shall we say, the infokinetic maneuver to they videoed and recorded all this. And to make further propaganda, they had like a song in the background and so on. And I was looking at this while I was walking in it, you know, and thinking, back then I was still in my idea of de-radicalization, democratization. This may be the Arab Spring, maybe the fourth wave of democratization, and we may see also a second wave of collective de-radicalization, meaning that radical groups will put down arms and negotiate and moderate and so on. So I was still thinking, and then I'm looking at this tactic, and I was thinking, with a small force and with very cheap, basically resources, they managed to do this. So why would they de-radicalize? Why would they democratize? Why would they, they will be very combat effective, and they will reach their political goals without, laying down arms. And anyway, the environment would not allow them to lay down arms because they're facing the Assad regime, and other forces. So yeah, so that got me interested, and I wrote an entire book about it. Sorry, it's a long answer for a very short question.
Not at all. Not at all. That gives us the background and where the interest comes from. Well, as you mentioned, it's pretty timely, this talk. We think about fall of the Assad regime, the new regime in place now. Up until a few months ago, this regime was labeled as a terrorist organization. How long that will be in place will remains to be seen. But why don't you thank you again for the introduction. Why don't you take us into your talk? I know you have some slides, so please feel free to put those up, and please, yeah, take it away.
Sure. So basically, the background. I don't know if you can you see my slides?
Yeah, that was good to us.
Yeah. Okay. Just giving me something here. Okay. So I'm going to speak a little bit on the impact of terrorism and warfare, and related to what we're talking about today in terms of the security and military challenges for NATO countries, and also speak about, when I talk about terrorism and warfare, I'll speak about both state and non-state terrorism and warfare, and also a bit about, if you'd like, in the end, given I'm happy to take any questions about Syria. So just quite a generic, I'm not going to go through all the slides, but I'm going to just give you a brief introduction to each of them, and then we can open the discussion afterwards. So very briefly, we have a change in historical patterns that has been going on probably since the mid-70s, which the summary of it is that the non-state forces are becoming more and more capable to defeat state forces on the battlefield. So some of the data that was collated and analyzed by colleagues would tell you that in the 19th century, when a state force meets the non-state force, usually the state force has a 90% chance of victory. That has gradually changed. That has gradually diminished until it reached now about 25% in 2020. And it does not mean that the state gets defeated in 75%, but the state force has to negotiate its way because it's incapable of completely defeating the non-state force. So why is this important? And there was the simple meaning is that the monopoly over the means of violence and the military effectiveness of the state forces have been challenged consistently, and their monopoly and the capability of defeating non-state forces is limited. And why is that? And there was quite a few explanations. Some of them talked about, or some explanations were centered on geography and how non-state forces are able to use it. Some others explanations had to do with popular support, state sponsorship for the non-state forces. The famous 3 Ps, the propaganda affects the public opinion affects the politics or the policy making, and how non-state forces are clever in such propaganda. We see this in recent cases, are clear in the case of Hamas most recently, how the usage of strategic communications and information operation affecting public opinion and therefore stiffening their support. other colleagues and other, shall we say, branches in the literature spoke about the strategy and indirect strategies versus direct strategies. But most importantly, and this is what I focus on, is that the non-state forces have been able to blend different eras of warfare. For example, the industrial era and the information era, for example. So that Tesla Cybertruck, ISIS never had a Tesla Cybertruck, but I thought it would be, it will summarize the argument. You have the information era of warfare with the Tesla Cybertruck, with the ZU-23, the anti-aircraft autocannon, 23 mil, very industrial era weapon, but then blend them together and be able to be more combat effective as opposed to military effective. Combat effective meaning tactical and operational level. With using these, many of these is dual use technology, and they applied this. I think the first time ISIS did it, it was in Mosul in 2016, when they had about 70 drones operating under 3,000 feet in the skies of Mosul, and therefore had, under the U.S. Air supremacy, they had their own little drones operating, and managed to halt operations on the ground for a short while because their EW was not very, their counter EW measures were not very developed, and but it was a significant development in that sense. Plus, of course, the suicide vehicle-borne IEDs, which was a very useful weapon. They modified. They changed basically a terrorism weapon, car bombs, into a battlefield weapon that has been quite effective. And they knew how to capitalize, how to set it up, execute it, and then capitalize on it or exploit it at a later stage. So my book on how ISIS fights, and later on most of these articles that I produced afterwards, was focusing mainly on that tactical level, like how the manipulation of tactics that belong to different eras of warfare, how is this used by non-state force, mainly to be combat effective. They do not usually reach their strategic gains, but they endure longer, and they are able to resist better, and they win battles. And if they are as lucky and clever as the Taliban, they can achieve a strategic victory in the end. So I'm not going to go through the research, the design, and for some of the works, including how ISIS fights, but I will just move on quickly to some of the findings of that book, and then I'll build on it a bit.
Right.
So mainly, one of the main findings is that this is an organization that used about 15 categories of tactics and shift between conventional warfare, guerrilla warfare, and terrorism very rapidly. And when it does so by in a centralized way. So it chooses at some point to dissolve all of its, shall we say, units that fight like guerrilla, and ask them to become just specialists in bomb making, detonators, gathering as detonators, and turn into a pure terrorist group. And they did this, for example, in 2008 in Iraq, when they were in a way losing the battle. So this resource shift towards terrorism, and then upscaling towards guerrilla warfare, and then upscaling when they have the resources and the enough manpower towards conventional weapon, they mastered it in a way. Then you'll see something different with Hamas, for example, because they rather than shifting, they apply all together. It's sort of like combined arms in a way, or using all three ways of warfare: terrorism, guerrilla, and conventional, almost simultaneously. And on a tactical level, it's a group that uses basically categories of tactics, and they mastered quite a few of them, including as I mentioned, suicide vehicle-borne IEDs, mainly to be able to achieve a favorable battlefield or a battle outcome. And I speak a bit in the book, a bit in details on the lethality versus the innovation. So on the tactical level, so here you'll find the highly lethal, the SVIBITs, the suicide vehicle-borne IEDs, and then this is the degree of innovation. So the using this is old now. It's very old school. It's 2011 using 2012 using the iPads basically to guide the mortar shots via Google Earth. And explain how and the teleoperated sniper rifles that were used to defend buildings while there was no one in the building except the two sniper rifles that they were using it, and the teleoperator was in a different place. So more or less like the lethality and the level of innovation is a bit explained in the book. But this is the tactic that I was talking about. That was actually, this one is in Ramadi in 2015. But this is the same tactic that I was talking about in Aleppo in 2012. So you see here the cement belts here, the basically these layers, cement slabs, layers to defend the building, which was the command post of the Anbar operation command at one point, and removing it first. So they did it by the book, like a suppress, obscure, secure, reduce, assault. They do the entire sequence. They suppressed with snipers. They didn't have smoke, so they didn't have obscure, but they tried to divert attention from the left side, from probably your left side, by having this very loud and noisy truck coming from this area, whereas the main attack, if you wish, came from the front. Again, first by removing with a suicide bulldozer, removing these slabs, and then by the small cars, the Toyota cars, and then by the truck, which took over the building. But also the bulldozer continued and did a second explosion there. Okay, so very briefly on the findings. This is sorry. Three main findings of that book. One of them that has to do with the shifts. I already mentioned it, the shift between ways of warfare. The second had to do with this is an organization that has innovated quite a bit in operational art. In a sense, it knows when it enters a town or a state, in this case, what it needs to do. There's a very clear sequence on how to take and control a town via a series first of intelligence gathering, mapping out what are the forces, what are the main social influencers in the town, and then by putting these false flag organizations there, mainly to absorb. So they would look like a religious organization or a charity organization, but what they're doing really is ideological propaganda for ISIS, and also recruiting individuals. But also this is recruiting individuals, but also recruiting sometimes factions from existing organizations. This is how Raqqa was taken, basically, to recruit factions from already existing organizations to make them betray the original organization and then join ISIS. Also a series of looting, and usually these operations are led by experienced individuals. And then after that, the very quick way of transferring know-hows and knowledge of tactical innovations, of shifting ways of warfare to smaller units. So it's not an OODA loop, but it's sort of a very quick transfer of knowledge or know-how between the units. They do not try to hide the experiences gains, like some units do in regular armies, you know, just make the other unit look bad, so don't tell them most of the lessons learned. In case of ISIS, they try not to do that, and sometimes actually they publish the lessons learned publicly. So if you looked at some of the An-Naba publication, one of the newspapers, you will find, you know, 4 articles detailing how to take a town, hold it for a few hours or a few days, and then retreat from it. So how to temporarily occupy it and why you should do that. And they're explaining it in details, you know, which was and this was, you know, anyone almost who has an internet connection could access it.
And is that, I'll just interrupt you there, is that information that's kind of in many ways conventional, you know, you're building up doctrine, as it were, for the organization? Is that during your research, is that the sort of thing that's been kept and again spread? As you said, they're not shy of spreading their successes, or is that kind of faded away?
That has still ongoing. So they still publish, An-Naba is still there. So the main magazine, I mean, it's issued, I don't know now, the frequency. It used to be issued every month, and then at one point every week, but then it stopped for a few months. So it's not, it's irregular.
Okay.
But it's still going on. Yeah, it's still going on. And then the final bit is also, shall we say it, if what I called I alter, so intelligence and then absorbing and recruiting and then looting and leading and then transferring the knowledge. So the acronym would be I alter. There is another operational level modus operandi that was repeated multiple times from West Africa all the way to the Philippines, which is how to soften and creep over a town, and then once you enter it, you coalition build, and then after that you liquidate the coalition and then consolidate your power. And the term I used, or the acronym I used in the book, was SCCLC, SCCLC. So soft and creep, coalition build, liquidate and consolidate. This is how they did it in Fallujah, basically. It did not work everywhere, but it worked quite well in Fallujah. So they escalated the operations around Fallujah and inside Fallujah, and then they start creeping with the units inside the town, forming alliances with about 6 other organizations, and then liquidating these organizations and their commanders at a later stage. So we're talking here between January and March 2014. But then that became like a template tried elsewhere, with mixed results. So this is for ISIS. That's the book. It's open access, so anyone can download it from Edinburgh University or Oxford University websites. But then I will go briefly to Hamas, and just very briefly on the 7th of October. So 7th of October, it was a as I mentioned, it was a blend of everything. So there was a conventional force, probably a brigade-sized force with a regiment, that motorized infantry regiment, and then a unit for paragliders, and another unit for naval, for a small unit for naval infantry, basically trying to breach in Zakim. But at the same time, that conventional force did not fight conventionally, so it committed terror acts, mass murder acts, and kidnapping of hostages and so on. And it sort of tried. This is what I don't understand, that the strategic objective. They did not try to hold the territory, so they did not do like ISIS, in a sense that, so ISIS would raid and then fortify and then occupy. So they would enter the city, and then they will hold it, like in the case of Mosul. So they entered, and then they fortified inside the city and then start expanding from inside. So they did not really do that. So there was also a guerrilla element here in terms of hitting and running. And the ones who did that in Sidrot and elsewhere, they did it because mainly there was no other alternative. They could not retreat, so they had to fortify and fight and hold positions. But the interesting bit here is what I mentioned: the breaching of the Israeli barrier was done also in a classic conventional way, but with unconventional tools. And it brings us back to the usage of dual-use technologies and blending two eras of warfare. And that picture, I think, summarizes it. So you have here basically the unguided rocket artillery in terms of suppressing the enemy air defenses and so on. And then under it, so they jumped there was obscuring, of course, there was sniper obscuring, and then there were drone usage to obscure the cameras and so on. And then there was a bit of reducing, and then the assault. You see the paraglider just under the suppression. So he's breaching or assaulting, but under the suppressive fire of the unguided artillery. So it's not a very accurate artillery in any way. So that was happening. But also what they did is that when they breached the wall, they did not secure it. They did not secure the breaching points, and therefore the result was losing control of the entire operations, because I think they wanted more manpower, but at the same time, you get the manpower, but you lose control. But also it reflects the sophistication of an unstate force, because what we know later on, this is the amount of intelligence gathering that they gathered. They knew exactly where to go. They knew where are the speed cameras on their way to make sure there's no there's obscuring of their movements and the movements of the unit. And then they did their recce very well, their reconnaissance, their ISR quite well, because they knew here is a sample. Where are these are the cameras location, but there was another document that was confiscated later on in the attack, showing which settlement has and town has how many guards, how many policemen, how many the potential defending units, and so on. So the reconnaissance was done quite well in a way. And then you look at an unstate force that, in a way, fights like a mixture of light and motorized infantry. So usual assault rifles, anti-material sniper rifles, unguided anti-tank rockets, and then guided ones as well. And then some man pads for the air defense, see the Sterlas, as well as drones, rocket artillery, and then more infantry artillery or mortars. So in a way, if you looked at it, this is like mimicking a light infantry force, basically, but with numbers that, by some estimates, reach 40,000. I just learned from recent research that actually the brigades is not 3 or 4 battalions, but some of their brigades reaches 8 battalions, because of one the specialized forces, between quotations, and then these are the ones with more accurate ATGMs and guided ATGM, anti-tank guided missiles. So the specialized ones are additional force. They're usually smaller battalions, but they are an additional force to the usual. So it's more like a reinforced brigade in a way. Okay, so that on the state level. On the non-state level, very briefly, this is the, sorry, this is on the non-state. Moving to, very briefly to the state level, and then I will stop. So this is the complicated version of Grasimov doctrine, or so-called Grasimov doctrine, which we know now that there's nothing called the Grasimov doctrine, but this is a simplification of what he said in one of the articles in terms of how the Russian hybrid warfare should be conducted in a way. But very briefly, I wrote a piece on the title of it, you see it here, on how Putin's army fought like ISIS in Ukraine between 2014 and 2022. And here I was basically relying on some interviews I've done with soldiers who came back from Crimea in 2016, and then afterwards other interviews as well. And when they were explaining to me how Crimea fell, I was thinking, they're telling me the story of how Raqqa fell, basically. So you enter a region or a town or a city, you destabilize it in a sense with propaganda, with psychological operations. You select what you need to, who you need to liquidate in terms of assassinations, kidnappings. You make sure that you have your own false front civilian organizations to be able to recruit and further destabilize. So a series of psychological warfare without saying you're here. So ISIS always denied that it exists in Syria. Jabhat al-Nusra denied that it exists in Syria for a while before it became obvious. So Maskirovka, in Russian. And then after that, you have, after you destabilize enough and launch your psychological warfare, you just secure the victory with a conventional force. ISIS didn't have a large conventional force, so they could not do the air assault that was done on Crimea and the amphibious landings and so on. But they had technicals, so they secured their victory in Raqqa the first time. So they took Raqqa twice. The first time in September 2013 by using the technicals to secure at least the neighborhoods that they controlled. So I was looking at this and comparing September 2013 to January 2014 in Crimea, and that was interesting. But it doesn't stop there, because the IED warfare later on that we have the data between January 2014 and December 2015. Russian and Russian-led separatist forces used IEDs over 600 times, and including about tens of attacks. I think 24 vehicle-borne IEDs and 24 remote-controlled ones, and these are the ones that were recorded with the time and the place and location and so on. So extensive IED warfare, and also the IEDs are planted to cover the retreats, because when they left the Kyiv Oblast, they planted enough IEDs by the estimates of the Ukraine State Emergency Services. There's about 70,000 explosive devices that includes thousands of IEDs, booby traps, and so on. That was in 2022. Now they did a lot of work in terms of clearing that. And then also I'm not going to go through the phases of the war for now. I'm just going to go on one final. This is the Crimea operation, basically. So you destabilize enough, and then you secure the victory with the state force, but also with the non-state forces, because this is a soldier or a fighter from Yamadayev militia, the Vostok battalion in Chechnya. He was one of Kadyrov's rivals, but he participated as well in the invasion and later the annexation of Crimea. So also using a non-state force. Of course, Wagner took this to another level later on. Okay, so this is just an overview. The operation later on was repeated in the Donbass. And when it was repeated in the Donbass, it did not really succeed. So Crimea was the highest success of a state force fighting like a non-state force, with a lot of destabilizers, and then securing with a conventional military. It was repeated again, a similar operation in Kharkiv in we're talking about April 2014, and that did not go well as well, mainly because there was no conventional force, so there was destabilization but no conventional force to secure it. So a mix of pro-Ukrainian state and non-state forces were able to control the situation, and then you have a 50-50 success applying these techniques in the Donbass, and then a 50-50 success. So they did not control all of the cities, but they controlled the two largest cities in the Donbass, Luhansk and Donetsk. And they controlled briefly Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, but it was taken from them by the first Ukrainian counteroffensive in summer of 2014. In a way, what does all this say? Well, it says that there are a lot cheaper way of fighting, cheaper in terms of resources, but cheaper also in terms of ethics, ways of fighting that can act as force multipliers and becomes more military effective, whether and can be employed by a non-state force or by international power. It's just they're less costly and they're more effective, so it's attractive for everyone to apply them. If you're going to go light on morality and ethics and laws of war and so on, and they're likely to be repeated. Now we see more of the conventional dimension, especially in Ukraine, but they're likely to be repeated elsewhere when these conventional methods prove to be extremely costly. And one brief example is right now the casualties of the Russian Federation. Casualties here meaning, dead, wounded, missing, POW, and defected, north of 800,000. While in Crimea, when it was ISIS style of warfare, they lost 1 militiaman and took the most important geostrategic region of the country and almost got away with it. Okay, I'll stop here and feel free to ask me about Syria or about any of what I said. I was trying to be as quick as possible because it's a lot to compress in 30 minutes.
No, that's great. That's great, Dr. Roger. Thank you so much. I think there's a couple of things you brought out there about whether it's a terrorist group, whether it's conventional forces, but what are you talking about? You're talking about innovation, talking about flexibility, talking about agility. They're kind of time-honored. All forces, whether state, non-state, need to be employing that in order to sort of find that win, whether that be tactical, operational, or indeed strategic. But the couple of points that you touched on, and again, I'll focus a little bit on Syria. What you really mentioned about, so much of that learning has shifted across, whether it might have been a group, ISIS, you mentioned West Africa, then we go up to the Russian Federation taking on some of those tactics and techniques to use in Crimea. What have you seen in the current kind of situation in Syria, where ostensibly a terrorist organization has gone from using a bit of a mixture of state and non-state tactics, terrorism, guerrilla attacks, etc., to now being in charge? How do you see that kind of playing out in terms of bringing disparate groups together? And what will that force look like in the coming weeks, months, years, do you think?
Well, that's a $1 million question. But I have three points here just to engage with the question. It's not an answer, but it gives some thoughts, some food for thought. So basically, yes, the organization started as a terrorist organization, in a sense that it was currently the Syrian president Ahmed al-Shara, when he was Abu Muhammad al-Julani, entered Syria as a member of ISI, of the Islamic State in Iraq, on the orders of al-Baghdadi, with 6 men. You'll find the story in the Syria chapter in how ISIS fights. with 6 men in summer of 2011. You know, by summer of 2013, so 2 years later, Nusra and ISIS together were not controlling, but either controlling or area denying about 50% of the Syrian territory. So it started with 6 men, no state sponsorship, and ending with about 50%. So it's a very, very clever organization in a way. And they split. So as you know, in April 2013, Baghdadi decided to blend both organizations. So the Islamic State in Iraq becomes the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And Julani basically opposed this. So they became 2 organizations, and they were really fighting intensely. And Julani in this period decided to declare that he's Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Syria, sorry. So he became in Al-Qaeda in Syria for about 3 years, and then changed, actually got into a war now with both ISIS and or IS now. So Islamic State in Iraq and Syria became Islamic State only, and also with Al-Qaeda. So when he broke away, there was an attempt to re-establish Al-Qaeda in Syria as Horas ad-Din, the gods of religion, in 2018, and he also dismantled that organization, or whatever was most of it. And he built a coalition, which is HTS. So what I'm saying here, it's a series of transformations on 3 levels: ideological, behavioral, and organizational. So the organization is not the same as the 6 men who came from Iraq after a period in the US-run prisons, and certainly they're not the same as they're not the same as Jabhat al-Nusra or as any of the previous organizations that they have led. But also there is a rhetorical and ideological changes as well. They will never condemn the past. Probably saw his last podcast with Rory Stewart. I would encourage you to watch it, and then also watch the comments afterwards of Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, because they were useful in terms of giving some feedback on context as well. So that's one. The second thing is that the organization was very clever in choosing the timing. So they saw the timing when all of the pro-Assad forces were at its weakest, whether it's Hezbollah or the Iranian influence in Syria. So basically, they used the timing when Israeli attrition and degradation of these forces were at the maximum. And they also did some attrition before, because the entire pro-change, whether they're secular, Islamist, jihadist, whenever, the ones who wanted to change the regime in Syria, regardless of their aims, this entire force killed about 100,000 pro-Assad soldiers, at least. This is from 300,000 that existed, plus the casualties, plus the defected, plus the POWs. So you know, basically the Syrian army was almost destroyed. So there was the attrition, even it was a long attrition over more than a decade. It had its effect in the end. So where do we go from here now for the future? Where do we go from here? So far they are saying all the right things and behaving, you know, in a way that is definitely non-jihadi. But then there will be quite a few challenges probably in the future, whether in between its ranks. So I wrote my first book was the de-radicalization of jihadists, and the findings of it as 4 things mattered in these processes. One is leadership. If the leadership is charismatic enough and in control enough, then the followers are likely to follow. And the second is the costs of the war. So how fighting degrades the energy of these fighters to fight back. So whether it's fighting or state repression or this physical costs of the confrontation, takes a toll. So they're tired, basically. They will be a bit tired. And the third is the interactions between the leadership and the layers of the organization, and between the leadership and the non-like-minded people, because then they have some influence. And the fourth is the inducements, like what are the benefits and the that they will get from all of this, from laying down arms as opposed to taking up arms. So if these come together, and for me so far, some of this of these variables are looking high, looking not low. So the leadership charisma is high. Tiredness from fighting or the costs of the war is high. The inducements are not very high. It's still in the, shall we say, medium, medium. And the interaction between the layers of the organization, they had a lot of time spent in Idlib to interact and to reflect on the previous episodes of the war. So it looks to me as if it's there is a chance for a what I called in the book comprehensive de-radicalization. But we're cautiously optimistic.
We'll see. Absolutely, cautiously optimistic. Well, listen, I tell you what, Dr. Shaw, we'll leave it there. But thank you so much indeed for taking the time to talk to us today. Huge amounts for us to digest and think about. But it's just, just for me to say, if you have watched this and enjoy this, please click on some of the other Southern Talks. And thank you very much to you, Dr. Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.